Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Tsunami fears remain across the Pacific after a Russian earthquake as waves hit the west coast of the United States. The Trump administration asked two judges to release the testimonies of Jeffrey Epstein and Leigh-Ann Maxwell as pressure mounts on the US president. And family and fans of Ozzy Osbourne line the streets of Birmingham as his coffin passes through the city centre for a final farewell. Now, one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded struck Russia's Far East earlier today, sending tsunami waves across the Pacific. Nearly 2 million people were urged to evacuate coastal parts of Japan, while people in Hawaii were told to get to high ground. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Dubai 92 presenter Jono and Michael Jabri Pickett, Managing Director of This Is Dubai. Great to have you both on the show with me. So, Jono, let's start with you. This is one of the strongest earthquakes in modern history. Tell us more. So
huge, 8.8, which when we look back at some of the ones that we've had historically, we had a 9.0 in 2011, and it's been 14 years since we've had something of this magnitude. So indeed, as you correctly said, one of the strongest in history. 2004 as well, the Indian quake that happened, that's a 9.1 to 9.3, and we've heard through the day today, this initially was an 8.5 that got upgraded to an 8.7 and finally an 8.8, but every time it goes up by 0.1 on the Richter scale, that in fact makes it 10 times more powerful than it would have been previously. So a full number is 10 times more powerful of a quake. So this is indeed a quake that was expected to cause carnage. And I certainly took a step back this morning and thought this could be huge when it first hit the headlines, and then to see the follow-up announcements that were made for Japan, for Hawaii, for these evacuations to take place across all the west coast, the east coast of the United States as well. I thought that this was going to be catastrophic. So I will say that I think there was a sigh of relief when we hit 10 a.m. in Hawaiian time this morning, and we discovered that although the waves had hit, everyone had got to higher ground, and I think everyone breathed a sigh of relief that we didn't see the catastrophe that we've seen from previous tsunamis, because this could have been a very, very different situation. And certainly the death toll currently, thankfully, no confirmed deaths. That's taken into account. There may be aftershocks that could cause some fatalities, but the worst seems to have passed for now at least. It's refreshing that this has not been what it could have been. Yeah, because as you say, a monster quake. When, we woke up, first heard about the news, as you say, 8.8 on the Richter scale. That's something really big. And obviously we saw pictures especially come out of the Kamchatka area in Russia. But as you say, luckily no devastation. Michael, really the affected areas, they seem to be evacuated very quickly, and the tsunami warnings the sirens were rang.
So one of the nice things about a tsunami, if there are any nice things, is that you can time the waves. So as long as that first one isn't too bad, you're going to have hours notice that you need to get out. What's really interesting about this is that it proves just how interconnected the world is. And I don't mean it from just a green point of view, but you have people sharing information across social media and news outlets as well. But you're talking about something off the east coast of Russia, and then that's affecting people in South America, which is affecting then people in Japan and China, and then the west coast of the States, Hawaii. And to Jono's point, getting up in the morning and seeing 8.8, right? That is considered the 6th most powerful earthquake that's been recorded. But if you go back to 2004, December 26, the Indian Ocean one, that was 9.2, and that was the 2nd or 3rd most powerful. Now that one killed more than 250,000 people across 14 countries. And you recognize just how lucky I think the global community was dodging this one today.
Yeah, absolutely. But we must remember that the 2004 one was obviously a bigger earthquake. It was still quite shallow, similar to this one, but
Yeah.
Absolute devastation, as you did say, across Indonesia, across Thailand. It was something that we didn't foresee. And I did speak to somebody earlier, a professor, about this and said, has technology really helped us now when it comes to these warnings that are in place and when it comes to earthquake and how we're seeing the tectonic plates shifting? Do we just have more information? And he basically said, yes, in many respects, we now know what to expect because things have become so much more advanced.
And I think when Sumatra happened and the 2004 quake happened, we hadn't heard about tsunamis in such a long time. We were desensitized, but on a local effort as well. Any area that was affected by that, which is many of the islands in Thailand and many of the islands that surround the south coast of Thailand, have all got tsunami zones now, tsunami escape routes, which were not there in 2004. So the devastation that was caused was obviously far more significant. And even with Fukushima in 2011, when that happened, remember that was an earthquake that subsequently caused a tsunami, that subsequently caused a nuclear disaster.
Yes.
And there were so many different facets of that meant that it was a huge disaster. So I do think the entire world this morning will have woken up and kind of had a panic attack. But the immediate message, and certainly from Hawaii's Governor, Josh Green, is get to safety and we should be okay and we can ride it out. And as we can see from the videos now, the waves are 10 to 11 feet compared to, and I think you mentioned this, Michael, as well earlier on when we spoke about this, the earthquake of 2011 when we had far greater.
So in 2004, for sure, I know that the waves were up to 100 feet, 30 meters. And this one, it was almost like kiddie pool stuff compared to that.
So we were lucky, I think,
Yeah.
for this one, lucky.
Absolutely. And earlier, I spoke to Professor James Jackson from the Department of Earth Scientists at the University of Cambridge Bullard Laboratories. I asked him why such a monster earthquake didn't cause more damage and what people can actually do to stay safe if there is another one. Here's what he had to say.
Well, it was smaller. It's still a very big earthquake. But where it happened on Kamchatka is not very populated, and most of the buildings you see in the photographs are fairly lightly constructed. They're not sort of high-rise skyscrapers or anything. And if they're lightly constructed buildings, they should stay up. These days, engineers and architects know how to build buildings which will stay up if they're fairly lightly built. But the big danger from these things is when they hit places where the building quality is very, very bad. If you live nearby, the only thing you can do is to make sure your buildings are okay. So reinforce them or build good buildings in the first place. And as far as the tsunami is concerned, it's education which matters. Everybody in Japan, for example, knows that immediately you feel a big earthquake on the shoreline, you move inland and uphill. And that's the message which every school child knows in places like Japan, New Zealand, California, Chile. That's taught in schools. And you always have time. Even if you're really nearby, like in Japan or Kamchatka, you have about 20 minutes from when the earthquake happens before the tsunami will hit you. If you're further away, like in Hawaii, you had 8 hours warning. So there's plenty of time to get out of the way of the tsunami in those places.
So there we go, talking about education, talking about time, all those things that contribute to the safety that we've seen when it came to this earthquake. But we also saw a quick picture there, and I think we'll bring the video back up again. Remarkable scenes of an operating table with a cancer patient in Russia, and they just carried on.
Amazing to see this, because I didn't know, were they trained for this or not? Nothing can prepare you for a situation like this, I'm sure. While they're doing the surgery, they pause for a second. They continue to hold on to the patient. All the equipment remains stable because obviously the brakes have been put on. And they seem so calm and collected about the whole thing. And I think I would be doing nothing but panicking in that exact moment. So really commendable to the healthcare workers for just holding their own during that really crucial moment.
So it looks incredibly dramatic because it's caught on camera, and it is. But living in Japan for many years, you get used to earthquakes. And the buildings, the way that they're designed, you just accept it and you go on about your business. My mother-in-law was visiting when our children were born, and she was caught in an earthquake in the building. And nothing happened, but it freaked her out because, of course, she wasn't used to it. Once you've been there for a while, so these are professionals. And although they probably don't train for it, they would have grown up with some of these. And I think they would have had the experience of just hang in there for 10, 15 seconds, it'll pass, and then we can continue on.
Yeah, because as the professor also said, it's all about education. And in Japan and in places like that where they are on tectonic plates, they taught these things in school. But aftershocks, a lot of people are worried about that too, John.
Well, because there's been there's been 7 on the Richter scale for the last couple of weeks in that area in Russia. Now you have to ask the question that, yes, we've seen an 8.8. That may be the big quake. There may be another one. And there may be, of course, there will be aftershocks that could go on for days or weeks after this as well. And they can also cause tsunamis, depending on how deep down they are. So it's a case of wait and see, because once the tectonic plates have started to shift, depending if they're convex or concave, will depend on how much friction is going on, and therefore at what level we're likely to see more tectonic activity. And you really can't tell that until it actually happens, in which case there has been an increase in seismic activity. If that continues, yes, there could be more follow-up quakes, but we hope, and I think for sure everyone in the region hopes, that the worst has passed on this one.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. A really interesting discussion. Let's move on to another story now. And the Trump administration have asked 2 judges to release the testimonies of Jeffrey Epstein and Leigh-Ann Maxwell as pressure mounts on the US president. During his recent trip to Scotland, Trump continued to be questioned on his relationship with the light financier who died in jail in 2019. The US president has faced scrutiny over making the federal investigation documents public. And Michael, I must say something. The controversy surrounding the Epstein and Maxwell investigation hasn't gone away. It's continued, almost supercharged, as much as the Republican Party do try to bat away any criticism. But there have been some new developments overnight. What does the Justice Department's new filing change, if anything?
So just a little bit of background first. So on July 18th, DOJ went to court asking if the transcripts from the grand juries could be released. On the 23rd of the month, that was denied. So they went back on the 29th, and they tried to make their case again with more information. We don't know yet what the verdict will be. I don't know that there will be a lot of hope that more information will be released, because there are real requirements that are needed for transcripts of grand juries to be released. And there are different reasons for that. Sometimes it can be because you don't want future grand jury participants to feel that whatever they say is going to eventually be released. In this particular case, we did find out, though, and this is a little bit of new information, is that for Jeffrey Epstein, for his grand jury, there was one FBI agent who testified. And for Ghislaine, there was that same FBI agent and a police officer. So there were no victims that were interviewed during that grand jury. So even if the information is released, I don't think it will help to quiet the crowd and the mega base and the people who are screaming for the Epstein files to be released.
Jono, do you agree with that? Is that just the Republicans kicking the can down the road, a diversion tactic in many ways?
We will, inevitably there will be a cry of people who will say this is another diversion tactic, but if it is, it's a tricky one to execute as well, because like Michael said, the proceedings that are there, they're secret by design. That's the whole idea behind a grand jury. There are no witnesses that are mentioned in this, but it is there to protect witnesses, because going forward, you don't want to set precedents that now we'll just open them up all the time. The integrity of justice has to be maintained and protected. So what you're looking at now is something that is extremely rare, very unlikely for it to be done normally, because it can be seen as political interference. Now, what also will be said by people who are on the side of against Donald Trump is that this is another distraction ploy or technique, which it may be, but they will have to, in order to release these files, take precedence. So we've got a couple of cases that have existed previously which have allowed the grand jury files to be revealed. Those include Watergate, 1974, even the Capitol riots as recent as 2021, and also the Mueller case from 2019. These have all been grand jury files which have been released because it was felt merited. The question is, will there be any information in these files that we don't already know, that haven't already been brought to the fore? It's very, very unlikely. These are not the Epstein files. Let's be very clear about this. This is not a release of any sort of a list or any sort of information that we don't already know. It's likely already in the public domain.
And what I find interesting is when Donald Trump was running to become president for the second time, the Epstein list and the JFK files was something that were widely discussed and said would be released. And this is why there's so much controversy at the moment, because that's almost been rolled back on. And people are now having more questions than answers, Michael, and conspiracy is becoming a big part of the story.
Yeah, you can't feed into the conspiracy for years leading up to the election. And then once you're in a position to actually release documents and then say there's nothing to look at. And the people that are part of the administration, Kash Patel, who's the FBI director, the deputy FBI director as well, Dan Bongini, as well as the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, J.D. Vance during the campaign when he was the VP nominee, he spoke about the Epstein files. The MAGA base is obsessed with this story, and the right-wing media MAGA supporters are also wanting answers. And what Donald Trump is doing is he's drip-feeding pieces of information every time it seems he's in front of the camera. And this is where I think he's adding fuel to the fire. He's not speaking to, it seems, professional PR experts telling him, this is how you kill this story. For instance, when there's a fire, you don't feed it oxygen, right? You make sure that it has none. And when you take that same sort of example and you speak about a conspiracy theory or an issue that you want to go away, you don't keep talking about it or tweeting about it. Of course, if we look back to the breakdown of the relationship with Elon Musk, when he then tweeted out the reason it won't be released is because Donald Trump is in those files, that didn't help either. And the great thing and the awful thing about a conspiracy theory is that any piece of information can be read either way.
I think what we're going to see here as well, because we have to remember that this has done a lot of political damage for Trump overall. So even whenever this gets released, and Pam Bondi has said it's there, it's on the table, we need to get it out there.
But she rolled back on that because she said that on Fox News, and then she was interviewed again on it, and she said, no, I didn't say I had a list, I just said I had some documents.
But a rollback on what was said versus what is the truth seems to be the whole key of this administration. And taken into account, because, and you've rightly, I think we discussed this earlier on, where you said, at one stage, Donald Trump said, I barely know Jeffrey Epstein. It went from there to knowing him quite well. We've heard echoes of him being really deeply rooted connections between him and Jeffrey Epstein. Him saying something that was, I think, probably a misjudged quote from him, from his part, but to say he'd never had the pleasure of being invited onto the island when he was asked about this on Air Force One. But we now know that one of his former staff went to work for Jeffrey Epstein, and this is a whole other story, and her identity has been confirmed, and there's another facet to that as well. This story is getting legs, even more so and more so. Getting the files out, I think the quicker the better. If he's not on there, great. I think the MAGA supporters will be delighted. I think we'll see across the board a bit of a back off in this, but there's got to be other stories in there that we don't know about, because it's taking on so many different facets and so many different legs.
The other thing that I would say is that, you know, it used to be an issue that the MAGA base focused on. And the Democrats didn't really pay much attention to it. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Joe Biden was in power for 4 years. He had the files. He could have released stuff. And there wasn't a big call for it. But now what's happening is that Democrats, as well as all the left-wing media, are smelling blood in the water. And they're now using this as an opportunity during a quiet period in the summer when there's not too much other big news going on. They are hammering this all the time.
But a lot of analysts do say that the Democrats obviously had access to the Epstein list or the Epstein files and probably would have released that if Trump was named extensively in it, obviously to destroy the political campaign that he was on to become president again. So there's whole different theories behind this.
But again, the opposite side of that same theory is that it would have damaged Trump, but how many Democratic supporters were also on that list, and it would have damaged them as well. And I'm thinking, of course, there are many pictures of Bill Clinton with Jeffrey Epstein as well. And there might have been very large Democratic donors who were also on that list. We know Bill Gates was affiliated in some way in that circle. So it's one of those issues where if the Republicans do it, they're going to maybe destroy Donald Trump and others. And if the Democrats do it, they may also be destroying some people on their side.
And we have to wait and see, because Leigh-Ann Maxwell, and we know that Todd Blanche went to meet with her and has had extensive chats. There's now a discussion that she may appear before a grand jury on the basis that she would be granted some level of clemency. So if we don't see anything from the transcripts that are released from the grand jury, and the Epstein files themselves turn out to be a bit of a red herring, then potentially Leigh-Ann Maxwell's conversation will land some people in it, and that's maybe the end story for this. But it really, every week there's something new that we think, just as you thought that this was the end, there's something else.
And Leigh-Ann Maxwell herself and her family have been speaking out, and she's really concerned for her safety. She's in prison. She got 20 years for this. She's the only person other than Epstein who did die who has been convicted for this. So we have no idea. She wants immunity if she does release names. So it becomes a really complicated, murky world.
We're also 11 days away from the 6th anniversary of Epstein's death.
Oh, wow.
Wow, I didn't realise it had been that long, actually.
August 10th.
Yeah, we'll definitely see how this unfolds because it's definitely not going away. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story. And Starbucks says it will phase out its mobile order and pick up only outlets because they lack warmth and human connection. The coffee maker said the move will not affect the mobile ordering service, which accounts for almost a third of transactions. In April, Starbucks boss Brian Niccol announced that they will hire more human baristas and also scale back on automation. Well, Jono, it's quite nice to know that humans are going to be getting jobs. But what do you make of this? Good idea or bad idea?
So that new CEO who's previously headed up Chipotle, Brian Niccol, I think what he's been tasked with doing is bring Starbucks back from the brink, which has been a concern for quite a while now. We've seen a shift in the dynamic from Starbucks, and I think that was probably pandemic inspired, whereby it became a very hands-off experience, and ordering coffee was something that was done online. You would rock up to a counter, grab your coffee and go. You would sit down for less time. And I think a lot of people, myself included, changed their coffee shop habits in around the pandemic because it was no longer an option to go sit down and enjoy that time where you could relax.
I never thought of that.
So that, I believe, is what changed my habits. Now I am a grab and go type person, and the human interaction for me, I could think of nothing worse. So I'm totally fine without having that back and forth with a barista. For a lot of people, I can see that as being a very highly social activity, maybe a big part in the highlight of their day. For me, it is simply fuel to get through the rest of the day. And I do enjoy having a casual chat with the barista who know me by name if I go to a regular place. But I certainly don't need or crave that human interaction, and I'm quite happy to get it from a machine just as well.
Everyone knows you by name, Jono. I just want to make sure it's not just the barista, it's the whole of Dubai. But Michael, I find this such an interesting idea because I must admit, when it comes to coffee, I've never really sat down in a coffee shop. You know, I just grab and I walk and I go. But so many people I know love to have a coffee. They love to people watch. You know, they love to read books. And I wonder if Starbucks needs to go back to that when you had magazines, when it was in a bookstore. The original Starbucks, is that what we want now?
So I don't know what the original Starbucks in Seattle was like, but I do know that the original Starbucks in this part of the world, and the ones that I'm familiar with, were a real vibe. They were a place where you had comfortable seats, and they were known for comfortable seats because you couldn't go into other coffee shops and experience that same sort of environment where you were almost welcome and encouraged to sit and take your time drinking your coffee. I do think, though, that there's a bit of a PR spin with this lack of warmth, as Brian Niccol has talked about. I would say it's more lack of profit, because if it was profitable, they would definitely continue it. Now, Brian Niccol, I think, is the man with the plan, right? He has talked about this initiative. It's called Back to Starbucks. I think he wants that vibe that we've talked about. But you have to remember that, as Jono said, he was at Chipotle. When his announcement was made that he was joining Starbucks in August 2024, Starbucks sales jumped 24%. He hadn't even, in fact, he was 6 months away from joining. But that's how important it was for Starbucks because he had done so well at Chipotle.
But you talk about this, but 2004 he joined.
No, 2024.
2024. But they've had 6 consecutive quarters of bad earnings.
Yes.
It's not working out.
So far, it's not working out. But I think when you have 41,000 stores around the world, I think you're in a position where it's not just 1 or 2. It's not changing the barista's uniform. It's not maybe getting rid of the 90 stores that are lacking warmth / lacking profit. I think it's almost like changing a bit of a battleship, getting that battleship to turn. You're going to have to introduce several changes, and you also have to get, we understand this in this part of the world, the protests of Starbucks was a big deal when Israel and Hamas first went to war. And I think that that spread around the globe, and it's an issue that I don't think Starbucks has properly addressed. And it's one of the challenges that they're facing for the lack of profits and for the 6 quarters of decline consecutively.
And especially when rivals like Peet's, which is a coffee brand, which is, by the way, one of the original founders of Starbucks, who has gone and founded his own coffee company and founded Peet's, places like Pret, places like Dunkin', they have that warmth and they've never let up on the human element and the eye contact interaction, which is what it's referred to within that industry. When they're still in the market and they're breathing down the neck of Starbucks, I think, like Michael said, it's going to take a lot of time to turn around public opinion on the brand and see it for what it was before.
But I also don't know if you agree with this, but I think over the years, you know, Starbucks was one of the originals and we all used to go there. I remember when, you know, I was at university, I was studying, many people sat there, used their laptops. It was the first kind of coffee culture that
Free
came
Wi-Fi.
in. Free Wi-Fi. But now I look around and people are way more into their coffee. You know, people like this coffee and that. Coffee's become more of a trend, but as an artisan trend, you know, you want your barista. I wonder if that's the problem. There's been a boom in all these coffee shops.
And I think anyone who is, and I sometimes describe myself as a coffee snob, but I still drink brown water. Like, if it gives me fuel and caffeine, I'm fine with it. I know a lot of Italians who would say that many of the chain stores, like Starbucks, like you take your pick, Costa, you name them, are basically just recycled water, and they're not a very good coffee, whereas the artisanal coffee shops are the places to be seen. They're hip, they're cool, they're serving your matchas, and they've got a menu of coffees that is quite substantial. And I think that's probably what Starbucks is losing out to grassroots companies.
I would agree with that, because I think, you know, people are way bigger coffee snobs than ever before. Starbucks, everyone wanted to walk around with the cup, didn't they? But people are over that now.
Also, there, you know, the growth of Nespresso, as an example, you know, the home device that can be 1,000 dirhams, where we are, or, you know, a couple $100s, or it could be a couple of $1,000s, where people, to your point, making it themselves. They want the machine. They want to steam the coffee. They want to grind the coffee beans. They want to do everything themselves. And it can be, it's almost like a hobby for some people. And that, I think, also has taken away a little bit when I can make my own at home, and people might think that that's so much better than whatever the big brand coffee is.
I must admit, I have one of those coffee machines.
Me too, and I do what I'm saying.
Is that really bad?
1,000 is on the lower end of the estimation for this. We're talking.
I know. I didn't want to admit it, but yeah, we're all there for it. But then again, they are actually thinking of changing the uniforms for the baristas to make it feel. And I wonder if they're actually thinking in that way. Gosh, you know, we've had all these really popular coffee shops open that do all this roasting and carrying on.
Yeah, but and again, I think you do pay. If I walk into a coffee shop, exactly, and there's a guy or a girl who's there who looks funky, cool, wearing the apron over their own clothes with several tattoos, I'm like, okay, this person's opinion on coffee, I will respect. That it's very difficult to replicate that when you walk into a Starbucks or a chain brand, whereby your options are, would you like this coffee or would you like decaf? Because you've got two options, take it or leave it. You're not getting V60s, Chemex coffees. You're not getting that in your local Starbucks. So I think they're going to find it difficult to compete with these artisanal coffee shops.
But
Well, I was just going to say, look, I'm a creature of habit. And there's something reassuring and comforting about the familiarity and the predictability of the taste of my coffee in the morning. So I will, unfortunately for all my friends, go to Starbucks and I will sit in a cafe with my Kindle, not a book, a Kindle. And
at least it's moving on in some respects, yeah.
And I will drink my coffee because it's familiar, it's comforting.
And I understand that too. But just a quick thought before we go. You know, they always ask for your name and they always spell mine wrong. But now apparently they're going to be putting inspirational quotes on your cup at Starbucks.
I hate the concept. It's happened already. And I normally am up quite early in the morning, so 5:30-ish I get my coffee, and nothing says, have a great day at 5:30 in the morning. It's too early for have a great day.
I also think it's contrived. If they really wanted to do something that was special, instead of Brian Nichol, who is a man probably close to my age, and I'm almost 60, get a 22-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 24-year-old in and revamp their social media accounts and start trends that will go viral. And this is the best way for people to catch on and to say, oh, that is hot again. I need to experience that. I need to be a part of that trend. And that's when they can post it on social media.
Brian Nichol, if you're watching, he's
Labubu
contactable.
lattes.
Yeah, Labubu
mix two things
lattes.
together. Labubu Dubai chocolate lattes.
Yeah, can you imagine? And Brian Nichol, you are on Instagram, aren't you? You can contact you for any advice there on how to market his Starbucks coffee. But thanks for your thoughts on that. Let's move on now. And fans of Ozzy Osbourne have lined the streets of Birmingham today to pay respect to the rock and roll frontman and reality TV star who died last week. The funeral took place in the singer's hometown, with his coffin travelling through the city centre before the service. Osbourne had played to crowds at Villa Park for the final Black Sabbath gig just 2 weeks before his death. Jono, I feel like this was just an extremely sad day for many people. It was really sad news when everyone found out about Ozzy Osbourne dying. It was a bit of a surprise because he was just playing, as we said, 2 weeks ago in Birmingham. But what were the scenes like today?
So they're obviously upsetting. We're looking at a funeral for somebody who was viewed by many as a grandfather type figure. And certainly I grew up with Ozzy Osbourne being the first reality TV star that I've been exposed to. And it was something that my family and I bonded over, because we looked at a family that was dysfunctional, that made our family look very functional all of a sudden. And I think a lot of people warmed to his character, having not known Black Sabbath music, because it's not my genre and it's not music that I enjoy, to knowing who Ozzy Osbourne was as a person and then relishing the icon that he was. Now, he didn't want today to be a sad day. He had said previously in interviews, I want it to be a celebration. My goodbye needs to be a celebration, loud music. I want it to be a rock gig. But then later in life, he kind of softened his tone on that and said, well, actually, a funeral's for who's left behind. And he later said that he doesn't really care what they do. If people want to have a cry about it, no issue. If people want to play sad music, no issue, because the funeral is for the people who are left behind. So he changed his tone on that in later years in life. What we saw today was an outpouring of just, it's not so much grief, because I think at his age, given the lifestyle that he'd lived, it was expected. We'd known he'd been sick. We knew this was his last gig. It was on the cards at some stage. But what this was due to be was a celebration of his life, but it was a fitting accolade for a guy who really will, I don't think, be forgotten by this generation.
Well, I must admit something. I obviously didn't listen to Black Sabbath either, but The Osbournes was the first reality TV show on MTV. My sister and I were absolutely obsessed with it. And really, you got to see Ozzy's true character, because, yes, he was bonkers. Yes, he was eccentric, but he was a real dad, and he loved his family, you know, and he always wanted to please his fans. So, you know, his legacy, what do you think it's going to be?
I think he has one of those fascinating legacies that I personally would love to have, which is, when I was doing a little bit of research, because you know a lot of some of the stuff on the surface, but how deep can you go? So originally it was, of course, 2 careers, you know, but I think he actually had 3. So you had 68 to 79 when he was Black Sabbath. And part of that is he's considered one of the people, if not the person, who invented a whole genre of music, right? And then he had, much to a lot of critics' surprise, he had a solo career that you could argue was more successful than his time with Black Sabbath. Then, of course, he had also, you know, the reality TV experience. So that's 3 careers. Now, you add on to that, he also had what was called Ozfest. Ozfest ran from 1996 to 2018. And this was a festival, an annual one, and it was an opportunity for heavy metal bands to ply their trade, to get a little bit of awareness. And there were some big acts, Slipknot being probably the biggest one, that came through that and has a lot of their early success due to Ozfest. So he has, you know, the obvious stuff and then some of the less obvious stuff. Obviously, he would have died, you know, a multi-millionaire. And he just had, again, I think you want a professional career that sort of something that's when you're younger and something when you're middle-aged and then something when you're older, you know, that you're versatile and you can move around and you can represent the people at that time who are fans of yours. And I think Ozzy did a great job of that.
And I think he bridged generations as well. Like we mentioned briefly, you know, I watched it with my parents, but then, and seeing some of the people who were in attendance. And I know that Elton John was a very dear, close personal friend of his as well. His Black Sabbath bandmates were clearly there. Members of Metallica were on board. But the musician Youngblood was the most unlikely pairing that I saw. And then there's this wonderful, warm video of, I don't know if it's pre or post Black Sabbath gig, and Youngblood was the support act for that, where he gifted him, it's a return gift almost, but it's a cross that he gave him back and said that you gave me one of these years ago, I still wear it, you're my musical inspiration. So now we see Ozzy Osbourne influencing the newest generation of music with somebody like Youngblood, and I think seeing that is just really a testament to how much he bridged the gap between young and old. And speaking of bridge, we see a bridge in place in Birmingham for Black Sabbath Bridge and Bench, which is there as well, which will continue for a lifetime to be a tribute to Ozzy Osbourne, which is beautiful really to see.
I agree, and I always look back at the Osbournes with absolute fondness. You know, that's something that also bridged the gap for us. If we wouldn't have listened to his genre of music, but we would have watched him on TV. So he really just spanned all sorts of different genres, different people, different ages. So he's a great guy.
I think he paved the way for reality TV, because up until that point, this fly-on-the-wall type documentary was not really something we'd seen. So you may say that he was the precursor for the Kardashians, for a Big Brother style or esque TV show to be such a success as well, where we got inside the lives of all these celebrities. And I think had it not been for Ozzy and Sharon and the kids who got involved, of course, because famously Amy never got involved in the TV show The Osbournes, but had it not been for them, we may not have been graced our screens with the Kardashians, which would have been such a shame for humanity.
I've never missed the Kardashians. But let's move on now. Rest in peace, Ozzy Osbourne. What a great character. And finally, Michael and Jono, it's time to hear your stories of the day. And Michael, let's start with yours. And there's an update on Australia's social media ban on teenagers. What's the story here?
So politicians have denied Google's request. Google owns YouTube. They have denied Google's request for YouTube to not be considered social media. Now, I, for one, believe that it is social media. It may also be what YouTube and Google say, which is a video streaming platform, definitely. But it is very much social media, especially when you look at social media's, YouTube's shorts, which, much like all of them, you can comment, you can like, and this is very similar to social media. So what's happened today is when the ban comes into effect in December in Australia, if you are 16 and younger, you will not be able to be on social media. For YouTube, you will not. You will be able to watch some shows, some content, but you will not be able to register an account.
So, Jono, I don't know what you think of this, because the UK have done a similar thing when it comes to social media. They brought in all these laws and there needs to be age verification. But since that's happened in the UK, the downloads of VPNs have completely spiked. And people are saying, OK, great, we bring in these online safety laws, but how do we police it? How do we actually make it work and put it in practice?
Look, I think any kid these days can run circles around anyone in this room when it comes to technology. Anyone who's 13 or 14 years of age will find a workaround on something like this. Australia has got a really tough task set ahead of them because the government have put it back upon the tech companies saying, you figure out how you're going to police this. But here's the rules, no YouTube accounts for kids under the age of 16. Now, I can see the benefit in not having something like Snapchat or Instagram or even Facebook, because we've heard so much about social media addiction, and any addiction that exists out there has got a regulation in place, be it tobacco or alcohol, whatever it may be. There's an age limit and there's a gap and there's a regulation. There is nothing for social media. And as somebody who trawls social media quite a lot for the purpose of work and for my own entertainment, some of the things that I get pushed is so dark that I would be deeply disturbed if that was viewed by somebody who was under the age of 18, never mind say under the age of 16. So there is an argument there, but again, this is the government doing what a parent's job is.
And some people would often argue that it starts at home, and it could be an education syllabus in the schools. The parents should have more control, parental control. It shouldn't just be down to all the tech companies to make these massive decisions.
It reminds me, you guys might not be old enough, but I remember when the internet was coming on, and some of the conversations that were taking place about how is this going to be controlled? You know, it was the unknown, and technology was playing such a big part in our lives because of the internet and the way that people were talking. And there was also, I mean, you look at all the politicians, right? They're all going to be older just because you have to be older to sort of have that experience to get the support to run for office. I haven't heard from any of the 16, 18-year-olds, and I bet you they will have legitimately logical arguments as to why it shouldn't happen and what controls should be put in place. But I don't know that anybody's done that. Now, if a tech company, because if they don't comply, it's a $32 million fine. If the tech companies were smart, they've got a few months. Get together with some focus groups. Get together with 14, 15, 16, teenagers in early 20s and say, what can we do to help you so that when you are on social media after you turn 16, you are going to be responsible? What is it that you think we should? If they can have those conversations now and get some information, I bet you that would be one of the best ways for them not only to win the PR battle, but also to show the world, because there's talk that Norway is going to be introducing something similar. We know the UK is looking at it. If those are successful, Australia is kind of the guinea pig. If that's successful, other countries will be looking at this as an option. So if the tech companies can say, yes, we've done our research, we've spoken to teachers, we've spoken to parents, we've spoken to students, this is the way forward. Instead of trying to fight it, if they embraced it and said, okay, this is what we're going to do, I think it would be a great win for them from a PR point of view, and they'd probably come up with some wonderful ideas.
And Jono, we're just going to move on because we're going to talk about a marriage proposal that took a lot of attempts. Has this gone viral on social media? Where did you find this?
So Luke Winthrop is 36 years old. He's a tattoo artist. He's proposed to his partner, Sarah. Wonderful story. She's a marketing CEO. She's a mum of 3. However, the number of times he's proposed over the last 7 years is quite high. Quite is an understatement. 43 proposals, 7 years, and she's finally accepted. He's had very elaborate setups. You might think maybe it wasn't good enough. Maybe she said, you know what, I deserve better than this. He's been to a castle in Prague, a romantic beachfront in Jamaica, candlelit dinners, and she said no at every possible option. She rejected him multiple times and said, look, I'm not ready for marriage just yet. I'm deeply in love with you, but I'm not ready to put a ring in it. On the 42nd attempt, she said, next time you ask, I'm going to say yes. That's what she said. So he was hopeful. And then in Greenwich, London, he said, you're the centre of my world. Would you accept my marriage proposal? And eventually she said yes. They got married already. They're done and dusted with this. But she's joked that the persistence may actually be a Guinness World Record, which it may be. They're going to check into that. But I think what this lady was doing without saying it outwardly was she's now settled and decided, well, okay, well, nobody else has asked me to marry. So after 43 attempts, I'll just say yes to this guy. I think that's what happened. And my mother always said, don't ever settle.
I agree with your mother. Don't ever settle. And that is a bad idea. But is this creepy or perseverance? What do you think?
It's creepy.
Yeah.
100%
I got
creepy.
the hint. I was 37 in.
Yeah, it took 30, but I learned my lesson. I was doing the math in my head while you were talking. That works out to about 6 on average, at least a year. So you work that out. That's like every other month for
I think she was
7
enjoying
years.
the attention.
Maybe so.
You just, at one stage, you'd have to walk away because every one of these has cost money. You can see this. And we mentioned the castle in Prague, the candlelit dinners. None of these were free proposals. So this lady was getting it every 2 months, a large, elaborate date night out, a potential proposal to say no. And I think that's just selfish. That's not setting you up for a good marriage. That's not 50-50.
Well, all I have to say is they look very happy in their wedding photos. We wish them the best of luck. His perseverance did pay off. And good luck to them in their life.
We have to do the follow-up when the divorce happens.
Yeah.
Yes, we will.
70% chance of that, by the way, just FYI.
Not if you're over the age of 30, that goes down. But anyway, that's all from us on W News Extra. Thanks to today's guest, Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes and Michael Jabri Pickett, Managing Director of This Is Dubai. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on XGNT with Michael Prendergast is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.